Hello friends, my name is Igor Gavrishchak. You are on the YouTube platform of Channel 24, and I am very pleased to introduce our guest, Sergey Zhirnov, KGB and Foreign Intelligence Officer of the Russian Federation. Hello Igor, hello to all our viewers. I would like to ask you right away, what to expect? The war has surely shown the Kremlin that all the steps of the United States, the White House, are calculated, and all these steps were made later than the steps of the Kremlin, because if you think back to the territory of the Russian Federation, now there is no authorization for strikes with missiles that the AFU has. From this point of view, Trump may be more unpredictable.
Кремль и Путин точно знали, чего от него ожидать. 2,5 года войны наверняка показали Кремлю, что все шаги Соединенных Штатов Америки и Белого дома, они просчитываются. И все эти шаги были на 2-3 позже, чем шаг Кремля. Потому что, вспоминайте удары по территории Российской Федерации, нету сейчас разрешения опять-таки бить ракетами, которые имеют ВСУ. И вот с этой точки зрения Трамп может быть более непредсказуем. И насколько вы считаете, что реально в Кремле...
How much do you think the Kremlin realistically wanted Trump to become president? I think they wanted that, but I'm not sure it was the right calculation.
Не уверен, что это правильный расчет, но это расчет вот какой. Если бы пришла Камала Харрис, то есть осталась бы практически та же самая администрация, потому что понятно, что у нее остались бы какие-то советники все равно, на которых бы ей бы там дал Обама там и так далее.
Their calculation was that if Kamala Harris came in, there would be virtually the same administration, because she would still have the same advisors, the Democratic Party. The course would remain the same.
То есть, грубо говоря, он вот так бы вялотекуще поддерживал бы Украину, но при этом он также вялотекуще истощал бы Российскую Федерацию. И если бы оставалась старая администрация президента Байдена и новая...
But the main thing about this course is that it was not going to change. In other words, with the old Biden administration and with a Democratic president in the same lineup, nothing would have changed radically. The U.S. would have continued to sluggishly support Ukraine. Yes, with delays and freezes, but it would have supported it by allocating money. This would prolong the war for Ukraine, but it would also simultaneously prolong the war for Russia. The Russian Federation is in a tough spot. If it's using 50% of its shells, replacing them with North Korean ones, replacing its army with North Koreans, and offering contractors over 3 million, it shows a severe shortage of troops. You're killing every day, even though the Ukrainian army is retreating a little bit on the Eastern Front, but still, it's killing over 1,000 Russians a day, wounding them. Thus, Putin would have no quick way out. Trump is a completely different person. There's a complete paradigm shift here.
Трамп – это совсем другой человек, то есть здесь смена парадигмы полностью.
He's unpredictable, of course, but precisely because he's unpredictable, he can both give Ukraine more and take everything away from it. I think the Kremlin is betting on Trump precisely because they hope they can convince him to take everything away from Ukraine and force it to surrender on the front lines where it stands now.
На той линии фронта, на которой сейчас стоит Украина, и даже отдать те территории, которые Российская Федерация...
And even give up those territories that the Russian Federation has formally included in its constitution, but has not yet conquered, in exchange for some assurances that the Russians will not go any further and that everything will be fine. That is, I think, their calculation. And here, Sergey, what could sway Trump? What you're saying, give more and everything he needs to hit the enemy as much as possible, or give nothing at all? What do you think that depends on? It's up to Trump himself, who has his own logic that I don't quite understand. If he wants to end the war, then he should give Zelensky everything he needs, 10 times more than Biden gave him. That's the logic I don't understand. Why not give Zelensky 10 times as much right away to get Putin to agree to the terms? Why is it necessary to pressure Zelensky first, to persuade him to give up 20% of his territory and agree to something that no Ukrainian will accept now, or let's say very few Ukrainians will accept it?
Тогда я дам Зеленскому все, что ему нужно, и в 10 раз больше, чем давал ему Байден. И вот эту логику я не понимаю. То есть почему тебе тогда сразу не дать Зеленскому в 10 раз больше, чем давал Байден, чтобы заставить Путина согласиться на условия? То есть почему тебе надо сначала давить на Зеленского и уговаривать его отдать 20% своей территории и согласиться на то, что ни один украинец сейчас в Украине не примет. Или, скажем так, мало украинцев.
It is clear that if Zelensky agrees to this, he will cease to be president. He will simply be swept away by all those who remain in Ukraine. In this sense, I don't really understand Trump's logic. I don't understand how he's going to carry all this out. It's a problem, of course, but it's less significant for me than it is for President Zelensky, because he's the one who will have to think about how to live with it. I don't see a way out for me in that sense. By the way, yes, as a normal person, I see the logic in what you are saying. I mean, why call Putin and say that if you don't stop, I will give weapons to Zelensky? Give weapons to Zelensky. Let the AFU strike for real. And then already call Putin and say, you see what will happen next if you don't stop. I think it will be much more effective than just saying, because in previous years, yes, the West has said this is an escalation, don't do it, we'll maybe figure something out. Absolutely right. I agree. It's the same story with sanctions, by the way. The West, in my opinion, has constantly taken the wrong position. They say that the sanctions are not working, that Russia is circumventing them, and so on. It is a question of organization and the West's willingness to actually implement these sanctions. If they truly wanted to finish with Russia, they should have declared a full economic embargo. No goods can leave Russia or enter the country. Only if Russia starts giving up its positions and withdrawing troops should the embargo be eased. Instead, they say, if Russia continues, we'll add a little more. For 2.5 years now, soon 3, they have been adding 3 grams each time. And every time they add these 3 grams, Russia learns how to circumvent them and gets the same 3 grams. Well, a little more expensive, but still. Sergei Oleg Deripaska, yes, a big oligarch under Putin, when it became known that Trump was winning, he wrote on social networks, "Good morning, oil at 50, there will be peace." To what extent do you think this could be leverage for Trump against the Kremlin? I mean, he met with oil tycoons, I think, in May, and there was talk in the U.S. press that he said that if he became president, he would allow more oil to be pumped in the Gulf of Mexico. He would also allow the sale of liquefied natural gas. And so he would put pressure on oil prices. Oil is going to drop in price per barrel. Saudi Arabia could get involved, and that could put serious pressure on Putin. I believe that absolutely, because that's what Trump has promised in America, and he needs to achieve it.
И ему обязательно нужно этого достичь. То есть, грубо говоря, он должен показать американцам, что, вы смотрите, при Байдене галлон бензина стоил там столько-то.
He has to show Americans that, look, under Biden, a gallon of gasoline costs so much. And under me, as soon as I entered the White House, all the companies immediately dropped their prices. Everybody in anticipation of me coming in got scared. Next thing you know, we started feeding more oil into the market, and all the prices went down. Now Americans drive on cheap gasoline because a gallon now costs $1 instead of $5. Trump had a principled stance, dismissing environmentalists' concerns about the harm of hydrocarbon fuel. He said he didn't care about all those arguments. His goal was for a barrel of oil to be worth $50. Below, by the way, he will not lower the price because American oil is not very cost-effective. In Saudi Arabia, the cost of oil production is $5 to $7, while in America, it is about $45. They can lower the price to $50, but no further. The Saudis can accept this since their production cost is just $7, meaning anything above that is profit. Even at $20, they still profit. Russia can't compete, as its oil is more expensive due to its heavy and pure nature with sulfur. The Saudis can drive Russia out of the market because even if they lower the price, they can win by volume. Take away those who can't sell their oil because it won't be profitable to produce it. In principle, Trump could make a deal with Saudi Arabia. Today, Sergey mentioned that Putin spoke at a forum in Altai and brought up NATO again, claiming it was a creeping intervention that caused them to launch their special operation. He also proposed an alternative to NATO, calling BRICS a prototype of a new free bloc. How realistic do you think it is that BRICS could become a serious structure? Realistically, Sergey, no. There is no possibility. These are empty words. Where he says it is also ridiculous. Why is the forum called Valdai if it is being held in Sochi? I still don't understand. It's idiotic. If the meeting is at Valdai, it should take place at Valdai, not in Sochi. I know why he doesn't want to go there, because he has built his new residences there, and now he doesn't want outsiders to go near them.
Никакой возможности нету, это все словоблудие. Ну, начиная, то есть вот какое место, где он это произносит, такое и такая и речь. Потому что, во-первых, он не выступал ни на каком ни на Валдае.
It is more pleasant for him to have them spend time in Sochi, which he built as a world capital for various congresses and other events.
То есть это идиотизм. Если вы проводите какую-то встречу на Валдае, то вы проводите ее на Валдае. Я знаю, почему он туда не хочет, потому что он там настроил своих новых резиденций, и он теперь не хочет, чтобы к этим резиденциям люди приближались. То есть ему приятнее, чтобы они просто проводили время в Сочи, потому что Сочи он строил как такую мировую столицу.
But if that is so, then call these meetings Sochi meetings. Why should they be called Valdai? This is absurd, and everything Putin said at this Valdai Club in Sochi is complete nonsense. Because if the place is idiotic, then everything that is said there is also idiotic. He tried to create the appearance of something important, but in reality, it is just stupidity. By the way, he was an hour and a half late, because it was announced that the meeting would start in Moscow at 18 Heed, in Paris at 16, and in Kiev at 17. In fact, everything started in Paris only at 1745, so take that into account. All those old bearded fools who had gathered there sat for an hour and a half waiting for Putin to finally decide to show up. Why was he late? Because he was already there. But Biden was speaking at the time. Biden was speaking, making his short speech on the White House lawn, saying goodbye to his associates after the lost election. Putin didn't feel comfortable starting the meeting until everyone switched to Biden in the middle of his, frankly, unsuccessful speech. So Putin waited and waited and waited for Biden to finish. Fortunately, his speech was short, but he had to say something. because in November he spent all day remembering the October Revolution, spouting some nonsense. He said a few words, and now political scientists are trying to make sense of the nonsense he said.
Вот, ну, сказал чего-то там. Ну, вот теперь, значит, с лупой там какие-то политологи пытаются найти какой-то смысл в этой ахинее, которую он там произнес.
Sergey, there's a lot of talk about how to get Putin to the negotiating table, what he might agree to, what he might accept as an offer. Can these theses be relied upon for analysis? The bottom line is that Putin, yes, he's over 70 years old, and no matter how you look at it, he doesn't have time to set something aside, to wait, to delay. He has to do everything quickly. He has to do everything in desperation, because as we see on the front, he's throwing everything he has at everything. Why should Putin sit down at the negotiating table? What can stop him? People's resources don't stop him. Neither does the catastrophic state of the economy, where half of the people don't know what to do and how to do it. They are already saying that maybe the central bank will start freezing the currency of Russians. But that won't stop either. What could stop it? That's a very good question, because most Western leaders don't get it. They think that only force can stop Putin. That is, only arming Ukraine. Now, if Trump said that if Putin doesn't agree to peace, a $500 billion line of credit will be opened for Ukraine, and Trump will flood Ukraine with weapons to defeat Putin, that's what can stop him.
То откроется ленд-лиз на $500 миллиардов для Украины. И Трамп завалит Украину вооружением, чтобы она победила Путина.
But here, as you and I have already discussed, there is no need to ask and guess. It is necessary first to open this lend-lease, first to flood Ukraine with weapons, so that Ukraine proves that with these weapons it can repel all of Putin's attacks, return his troops to the 1991 border, and hit his military facilities on Russian territory at any depth. That's when it's all destroyed. That's when Trump calls Putin and says, "Did you see this happening? If you don't sit down at the negotiating table now, I will give you twice as much as I have already given you. And if you don't sit down, I will give you 4 times as much, then 6 times as much, then 8 times as much, then 10 times as much, until you realize that you have no choice but to agree, which means to leave this territory." This is the only way that works with Putin. Nothing else will work with him. Sergey, there is a lot of talk now, well, not now, but a few months ago, about security guarantees. But I think it is correct to call them just agreements on some kind of cooperation. Yes, Ukraine has signed agreements with many countries, including the United States and Italy, and we remember we signed them with Biden on the eve of the peace summit. I have a question. Even if there is this good scenario for the AFU, that Trump will give the opportunity to use a lot of weapons worth $500 billion and give the opportunity to respond well to the occupation troops from Russia, what's next? Who is willing to take on the security guarantees? Here, I just don't get it. Theoretically, if the active phase of the war stops, Russia's military-industrial complex will continue to increase its turnover, and the troops at the front of the occupiers will be able to move more freely in the territories they occupied, because no one will be beaten. There will be some kind of ceasefire. Theoretically, Putin signs some agreements, but what prevents him from violating them in the future? There will be no answer, because Russia is a nuclear country. And what, who, and how can answer for broken agreements? This is the biggest problem, yes, because the real problem is that Putin does not have a reputation for keeping his word. So it's pointless to enter into any negotiations, any agreements with him. The only real guarantee for Ukraine is Putin's departure. One of the agreement points suggests Ukraine won't join NATO for 20 years, but Ukraine must demand that Putin and those who led the war leave. As long as any of the Russian leadership from the past 3 years remains, Ukraine can't consider the Russian Federation's threat gone. Until you destroy your military-industrial complex, until you are forbidden to produce this and that. So in fact, of course, the question of guarantee is the most important issue. The papers Zelensky signed were diplomatically important, but they mean nothing. These guarantees are fake. In 2014, under the Budapest Memorandum, the US and UK were supposed to ensure Ukraine's security and threaten Russia over Crimea. But they did nothing. All these signed documents aren't guarantees and may not hold international weight. The global system, UN, treaties, conventions, only works if countries voluntarily comply. Macron mentioned in Budapest today that geopolitics is divided into herbivores and predators.
Просто она перестала действовать, потому что она действует до тех пор, пока ее соблюдают сами страны, добровольно соблюдают. Вот пока они, так сказать, уважают друг друга.
He says that we are herbivores because we observe all laws, take into account our obligations, and there are predators, meat eaters, who do not care about all this. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and other such countries.
И он говорит, что вот мы, так сказать, травоядные, потому что мы соблюдаем все законы, мы, значит, учитываем свои обязательства, а есть хищники, значит, мясоеды, которым на все это дело наплевать.
For now, so to speak, 27 herbivores, if they unite, can scare even the predators. But on the other hand, we need to be omnivores. That is, he hinted that if necessary, we can become predators like those who oppose us. That's the kind of hyperbole that President Macron was using. Here, by the way, about the speeches, Macron was the third speaker, if I'm not mistaken. Orban was the first, Zelensky was the second. And what's interesting, I don't know, Sergey, if you've seen this already, but Zelensky was not shown in the general pool on this show. And what's most interesting, they were saying, it wasn't a public statement, but Ukraine denied any such agreement, suggesting a potential scandal. I don't know the details, as there was a lot happening today. However, I did see a photo with President Zelensky standing next to Charles Michel in the front row.
Сегодня много событий было, я все не отслеживал, но я видел фотографию общую, где президент Зеленский стоял в первом ряду по правую руку от Шарля Мишеля. Так что в этом смысле, то есть на общей фотографии он есть.
I just don't know how the performances were distributed there, what was broadcast and what was not broadcast. We understand that Orban was the host, and he could do all sorts of nasty things because he is the host. Here. But in principle, so to speak, everything seems to be in place. I haven't heard about this scandal. You're the first person to tell me about it. Well, we'll see if there's more information and what it means. Sergey, I would like to ask you frankly, don't you think that in the situation in which Ukraine finds itself now and the architecture of world security, which in fact does not exist, it is very convenient for the West to have a North Korea like China has a buffer zone? Here's Ukraine, where it's holding Russia back. We see that everything we are given as aid is only in return.
как помощь, это только на взамен. Если там Польша получает F-35, она дает МиГи-29, и если кто-то получает лучшие танки Леопард А-2, они старые А-1.
Poland gives MiG-29s when it receives F-35s, and countries send old A-1 tanks to Ukraine when they get newer models. The West views Ukraine cynically as a buffer zone to hold back Russia and protect itself, only offering help when they get something in return. Again, like North Korea, there is such a buffer on the part of South Korea and the United States of America. There is a rational grain to what you are saying. Here, though, you could give other examples, because let's say France gave you its Caesars, the nicest howitzers it had. She took 20 howitzers and then gave away almost all of them, realizing she wouldn't need them on the battlefield anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that she gave you bad weapons. These howitzers are really very good. Another thing is that they cannot operate with the intensity with which this war is being fought. That is, they break down faster than the old Soviet barrels, although those old Soviet barrels wear out too. In general, modern weapons are more finicky and can be more difficult to operate. But otherwise, yes, you were still given decent weapons. Storm Shadow, for example, is not garbage. The same goes for HIMARS. They're some of the most modern systems out there. Another thing is that you weren't given something that could hit farther, more accurately, and harder. In general, the complaint is more about quantity rather than quality. You are not being given enough to be able to defeat the Russian aggressors. The counteroffensive last year failed not due to Ukrainian troops' inability, but because there weren't enough weapons. A successful offensive requires significantly more forces than the enemy, and with parity, only defense is possible. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
Чтобы там делать на направлении главного удара, нужно концентрировать, там, я не знаю, в 10-15 раз больше, чем есть у противника. А когда у вас еле-еле вы выходите...
Sergey, with regard to the new administration of the United States President Donald Trump and its relations with Europe and NATO, under Biden, as I understand it, they tried to at least demonstrate that the collective West is united in countering Russian aggression. Will that be the case under Trump?
Потому что при Байдене, я так понимаю, они пытались быть и хотя бы показывать, что они коллективный Запад против агрессии России. Будет ли так при Трампе?
He rebuked NATO a lot before the election, saying that the alliance countries should spend more than 2% of GDP on defense. And he's right, because the United States can't defend the entire old continent. But my point is this. Won't Trump destroy the alliance? Won't he make it weak? Won't it lead to more divisions within the alliance? Already today, this topic is being actively discussed in France, and it is one of the main topics. In a few hours, I have a broadcast on my TV channel, and one of the topics will be a discussion of how to respond to Trump's actions. Trump is not yet confirmed as president-elect. The electors must confirm him in early December, and he will take office on January 20th, 2025. I mean, really, he has yet to live up to all of this. For now, all of this remains hypothetical speculation. At this point, no policy from Trump yet because he is not a sitting president, and Joe Biden will be in office for another 2.5 months.
так сказать, пугаться, рановато себе пугалки какие-то запускать. Вот когда он вступит в Белый дом и когда он начнет объявлять свою реальную политику.
So it's too early to worry, too early to start scaremongering. When Trump enters the White House and starts implementing his policies, then we will have to react to them. For now, it's all just scarecrows, but these scarecrows are already starting to work. Countries are starting to say, Poland, for example, says that it has learned its lesson and will now spend 4% of GDP on defense, and next year it will be 4.7%. The French, by the way, had 1.2%, and now they have raised it to 2% and are going to keep raising it. Even now that we have a new government in our country, they are looking for ways to save money to pay off the national debt, but the Ministry of Defense will be virtually unaffected because it is one of the few whose loans will not be cut. In that sense, of course, it's a problem. But it's a problem that Europe has to deal with one way or another. And, as you know, the problem is that everybody is used to not paying for these pleasures. Everybody is used to the United States paying for defense. When you spend 50 or 60 years saving money, investing it in other areas, and you keep cutting defense budgets and cutting armies, of course the economy grows elsewhere. And now Europe has to remember these expenses and go back to the old realities, which of course is painful, because it will have to cut other budget items. But I will remind you that Europe is not the poorest region. Europe's GDP is between 14 and 17 trillion euros, and that is comparable to China's GDP. If China has the ability to allocate 300 billion a year to defense, Europe can also allocate that 300 billion cumulatively to its defense. If the 27 countries of the European Union decide that each country should have an army of 100,000 men, then you get an army of 2.7 million men. So Europe has the ability to do all this. Of course, France, as a large country, will have an army of 200,000, and Estonia, as a small country, will have an army of 30 or 50,000. But in general, these figures for the European continent are quite achievable. Europe is a rich continent, so you don't have to think that it doesn't have money. The simple fact is that Europe has been used to relying on the US and the Kremlin for the last 50 years, and now it looks like it will have to rethink its priorities.
Сергей, большое вам спасибо за этот разговор. Спасибо, что нашли время, проговорить про важные процессы, про отношения Трампа и Кремля, про влияние Трампа на Европу.
I think the next 2 months will see a lot of interesting things and conversation. Thank you very much. With us was Sergey Zhirnov, ex-spivobitnik of the KGB and the Russian Federation Security Service. My name is Igor Gavrishchak. We will meet you on the air of Channel 24.